The response reaper has returned. This time, I'll be responding to Tsumami's video titled, Why Fire Force is Better Written Than Soul Eater. But before we get started, I need to deal with something. Fire Force's real name is enen no shobotai, which roughly translates to Flaming Firefighter. Fire Force is a lame translation. It sounds like a new season of Power Rangers, so I'm gonna call it Blaze Brigade. It keeps the alliteration, syllable count, and sounds cooler. I planned on responding to this video ever since he announced it. Tsumami's videos on Bakuman and Promised Neverland showed that he had an admirable level of understanding in certain areas when it came to storytelling. One thing I was worried about is that he would mention things in Blaze Brigade farther than I'd read or watched, but he didn't, so that made this easier for me. His first argument is that soul collecting quickly becomes irrelevant, and the story is forced to constantly introduce new threats and ideas. Let's start with the first part. Maka and Soul's goal is to make Soul a death scythe after collecting enough souls. This is a goal, but I consider it a passive goal or a soft goal. This is one that's in the background and not the driving force of the story. In my last video, I said the same thing about Saitama from One Punch Man. His goal is to find a worthy opponent, but this goal is even more passive than Maka's. This goal doesn't push the story forward, and you can easily forget it exists. Instead, both of these characters are driven by purpose. In my video, How to Write a Good Character, I argue and prove that a character doesn't require a goal to be good. They can have a purpose instead. Basically, this argument sounds like it's criticizing the protagonist for not having an active goal and not being the initiator in every arc. But if we want to get technical, Blaze's protagonist isn't completely active either. Before the heroes take on any kind of mission, the antagonists have to do something first to catch the eyes of the heroes. The only difference is that Soul's villains come to them, while Blaze's has their heroes going to the villains. Now the second half of his argument. The story is forced to constantly introduce new threats and ideas. This is not a flaw, but if it was, nearly all battle manga I've seen do this. In my video, Adding New Arcs, I break down this formula for Bleach, Yu Yu Hakusho, and Kenshin. Naruto, One Piece, Fairy Tail, DBZ, JoJo, and more all do this to some degree. They put food on their plate, but before moving to the next meal, they take the leftovers from the first plate and use it to create the second plate or mix it in. As Tsumami says, the villains are often introduced before they become the primary antagonists. Krona and the Kishin are the two final antagonists. The former is introduced in chapter 4 and the latter in 16. As for Blaze, was Hibana introduced at the start of the story? How about Rei? How about Sho? How about Inka? They're all new threats and ideas that were eventually introduced. His next argument is that locations are designed for instances, not narrative. Honestly, I don't even want to tackle this argument, not because it's bad, but because it's such a minor factor in determining which story is better. As I've said in the past, most notably in story theory, setting is the weakest of the four pillars. I can't recall a single time I've dropped a story because of my problems with the setting. I've dropped stories because of themes, characters, and plots, but never setting. But I do have to critique his decision to use the anime-only ending as evidence. It's not canon, and that makes this argument disingenuous. The main point I got from this is that we don't see how the world is affected by the conflicts that occur in the story, which I can concede, but I don't remember that happening in Blaze either, to be honest. Now he switches to Blaze Brigade. He says that in Blaze, everything ties back to spontaneous combustion. Fair point. But is that really an argument worth making in this context? Soul Eater doesn't have some concrete event or concept that everything ties back to, but here are some other stories that also don't. Yu Yu Hakusho, Kenshin, Hunter x Hunter, JoJo, and Toaru. Are we really going to say that Blaze having this quality over them is conducive to it being better written? Tsumami briefly mentions that Blaze has no location dissonance. That's not an objectively better feature though. His next argument is that Blaze has impetus and agency, and that makes the story feel like he's moving towards an end goal. Like I said before, this is a difference between a protagonist with a goal versus one with a purpose, but more specifically, a difference in antagonists. If the villains come to the heroes, it will give off the feeling of having passive heroes. But if the villains have to be caught by the heroes, it feels like we have active heroes. But neither villain is superior. It all depends on the story. If the villain is trying to stay hidden, of course the heroes will have to approach them. But if the villain wants to kill the heroes, or the heroes have something the villain wants, of course the villain is going to come to them. It all starts with the villain, because stories move due to conflict, and conflict is created by antagonists. Tsumami cites Super Eye Patch Wolf for characters lacking agency, which is a mistake. That's a bad video, and I'll cite DBZ Imran's response to that as a response to this. His next argument is that Blaze contextualizes Inka's decision-making before her important moment happens. He says this gives her agency. I think her choice to be not protected is what gives her agency, not the contextualization. That's just a bonus. He gave an agency example of going against the expected outcome, but two can play at that game. In episode 19 of Soul Eater, Dr. Stein comes up with a plan for our main trio. Black Star is supposed to fight Krona because his soul wavelength attacks can get past Krona's black blood. But when Krona appears, Maka says she'll fight him. Soul, Black Star, and Tsubaki all tell her that it's a bad idea, but Maka holds out her scythe in front of Black Star, enforcing her decision. That's agency, right? Next, Tsumami criticizes the fan service. It's funny that he mentions the Toaru series for his fan service argument. He says that Soul Eater's secondary appeal is fan service and that it's sometimes too much. Toaru is an anime series that I love, evident by my multiple videos on it. But for him to say that Soul Eater's secondary appeal is fan service and Toaru's secondary appeal isn't, rather that it's scientific and religious concepts, is unbelievable. I can almost guarantee that Toaru has a higher pervy scene per episode ratio than Soul Eater. Anyway, I don't think Soul Eater overdoes the fan service. There's definitely more of it than in a regular battle manga. But I personally find a lot of those scenes entertaining on a comedic level. He argues that these scenes make it hard to recommend, but I'd argue that most anime have something like this that would deter fans that are new to anime. Additionally, this hard to recommend argument assumes that not only are his targets not used to these anime hijinks, but also wouldn't enjoy it if they weren't. Each person has their own tastes, but it seems like Tsumami is implying that fan service is universally frowned upon. He says fan service is divisive and could eliminate potential fans. I don't know about that. I'm not sure what experiences led him to believe that or what data he has to argue that, but in my experience, soft fan service like this has never been divisive. I've seen people complain about things like this, but I've never heard of people dropping a story over fan service as low scale as this. He says fan service ruined Kid in the last chapter, but I don't see how. I wish he elaborated on this. I'm glad he mentioned Tamaki, because that was one of the worst parts of Blaze. It's not creative, it's not funny, and it can interrupt serious moments and ruin the emotional impact of a scene. He said he finds it disturbing, however I personally don't. If this happened in a low-stakes comedy anime, I'd be all for it. But it doesn't belong in a high-stakes story, especially when one of the consequences for failure is death. Overall, this argument was lacking and poorly conceived. The points he tackled for arguing one story was better written than another were unbelievably minor. He didn't tackle themes, character, or plot. I think Soul Eater has better characters, character development, antagonists, story arcs, action, and overall execution. I think that Blaze has a better power system, and that the mystery detective vibe in the first season was a strong point. But none of these things are mentioned. On top of that, I countered most of these claims with ease. This video is nearly 32 minutes. This is longer than the last video I responded to, which was 30 minutes. Yet the script is a little over 3 pages, and the other was 5. Also, he said he doesn't consider being better written and being a better story as the same thing, which makes no sense to me. I appreciate his willingness to criticize something that he loves, but these weren't high-value criticisms. Overall, I don't even think Blaze Brigade is that well written. It's just okay to me. Meanwhile, Soul Eater is impactful. I could make a detailed series of videos explaining why I think Soul is superior to Blaze, but the point of this video is to respond to his arguments, which I've done. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and help me revolutionize the manga industry by buying my manga and spreading the word. All important links will be in the description.